Okay, what's up, Derek?
How's it going, Ryan?
I'm doing great. Thank you for coming on, and it's an honor to be speaking with you today and connecting.
Likewise, likewise.
So, we're having you come to New York City October 23rd, 24th, so you can teach your running mechanics certification level 1 and 2. We're super excited, so I want to just kind of put something out and let the audience hear a little bit more about you and what we're going to go over that weekend and just training, rehab, and everything overall. So I'm excited to be speaking with you today.
Yeah, well, I'm very honored and happy that you contacted me 2 years ago, and it's taken about 2 years for us to go. Okay, let's do it. Assuming all of the stuff that happened in between and all that, but certainly I'm excited to reconnect with people like yourself and others that I know in that area of the world.
Yeah, I think it's we took for granted how we used to be able to just do these things whenever we want, but kind of like we were talking before, the pandemic has made us appreciate some opportunities and realize that also there's a lot of opportunities for living in a virtual world. So yeah, we're super excited to have you. I know it's been over 2 years since you've been in New York, and I know you got a big New York following. You've been here a couple of times, right? With Drive and Hype and those people were awesome. Um, so before we dive into it really quickly, do you mind if we just I know you're an awesome professional and you're a thought leader and a great coach and consultant, but can you just share a little bit about your background and what you do and to get people started?
Yeah, no problem. I guess a lot of this with many of the people in the industry started when I was young, and I was a track athlete, and I did other sports too, basketball, soccer, and I think I'd be lying if I said that didn't really influence my desire to get involved at this level um, and be involved with sports. And now I'm involved with my kids' teams and all that, and I can see how they value what they're experiencing. And I don't know if they want to be a strength coach, or maybe I'll discourage it, but certainly a physical therapist. But um there's a lot of things that I draw from my youth. And the one thing in track and field, and I always say this, is like I would go every year and compete in track meets, and every year you'd get better, right? So if I was say I did long jump a lot, so every year you'd be able to see, wow, I increased another, 2 feet in my long jump every year because I just showed up. And
Mm.
obviously that has something to do with growth, but certainly there was a training component that I appreciated. And you're always being measured, whether it was running 100 meters, whether it was long jumping, throwing a shot put. So that quantification and the idea that there was technique and training behind it really influenced me. And even when I played other sports, um, I, I appreciated the fact that I was faster than most of the people that I was competing against, and that's obviously genetic. I got to thank my parents for that, and now I see it in my kids too. And I can think I'm this fabulous coach, but certainly genetics is a big part of that. And my wife was a track athlete too, so I'm like, okay, so maybe there's a breeding thing going on too. But um, I appreciate all that stuff. And then when I went into university, and I didn't study kinesiology or, physical therapy or anything like that, but I kept coaching beyond my athletic career when I was doing my grad degree. And I worked for an engineering firm for quite a few years and as a consultant. And then I just said, well, I want to get back into just coaching and doing that. So I kind of stopped that career and started my own career in terms of being a strength coach and being a track coach. And a lot of the time, most of the stuff that I did wasn't for pay. It was just sort of, I want to do this and I want to learn and track down different mentors, and eventually started working at a university as a strength coach. Started working with other national teams, different sports, Olympic teams, and eventually got into professional sports as well. And then it's at some point I said, okay, I've spent 12 to 14 years as a university strength coach. I want to start working beyond that. And so that's when I started doing more of the consulting work. And then after a while, you're like, hey, I think I kind of know something. Maybe I'll create a course. Right. And that's where I'm at right now, is that I've spent, 30 years coaching and working in some degree of rehab. And now I think, okay, I kind of have something that I think that works. I've shared that with others, and other people have had success using the same process. And so that's where we're at right now, is I have, 3 different courses, and I'm building other courses around deeper dives, whether it's, sprinting, programming, contributing to the return to play process with that knowledge. And I think, and the great thing about New York, and I talked to you about this before, was that there seems to be this sort of entrepreneurial spirit around, hey, let's teach others, let's all be better, let's try to work with as many populations as possible. It's not just athletes, it's general population, fitness, the healthcare side of it. And I think that's where I've been able to, being around people like yourself, go like, okay, well, how can what I do help you? And so that's what I love about that environment, is that it kind of pushes people to be better and to diversify their skill set. And so that's hope. I'm hoping what I'll be able to present is like, hey, this is how you sprint in a straight line. How does it affect what you do as a personal trainer or a physical therapist, or a sport coach? And I think that's where I've spent most of my energy in the last 5 years, is like, let's adapt it so that many people can take advantage of this.
Yeah, I love that. And there's probably like 5 topics I want to ask you about that you brought up. Everything from why physio and not strength coach, because there's all this. I believe in breaking down the silos, which is, I think, your program is going to help with that, because you're teaching both sprint mechanics and also the medical application to it and return to play. So I want to ask you about that, but also a little bit more about your journey and the application to everyone. I think that's huge, because I think some people don't realize that this applies to almost everyone. But before we go into all those things, you mentioned you reached out to previous mentors. Can you speak a little bit about some of the people who you learned from and how you shaped your approach, and then the way you've applied it and all those things?
Yeah, like a perfect example would be somebody like Al Vermeil, who I got to know Al through Charlie Francis, who was a mentor of mine as well. I'll talk about him shortly, but Al Vermeil like texts me and calls me, and we talk, almost every day, every other day. And a lot of the time he's texting me because he like pulled his hamstring. He's like 75 or 76 years old. He pulled his hamstring doing sprints or throwing a discus or something. And so he's like, what do you think? I did. And I'm like, well, you're 76 and you're trying to throw a discus and sprint, right? You're trying to do the decathlon at age 76. So stuff's going to happen. But that's the kind of engagement that you need to get better, in terms of like having a group of people that you can bounce stuff off of and go, what do you think of this? And then, that they appreciate you when they kind of throw it back at you and is, okay, well, this is what I do. What do you think? And I think that those were the type of people that I tended to gravitate towards. Was, you're not just going and just having this one-way communication where they're just telling you what to do. It's kind of a discussion. It's kind of a collaboration. And, I'm, quite a bit younger than Al, but, I'm very fond of the fact that he, took my advice as well. And even Charlie Francis, same thing. We would be at the track, and, somebody who was a world-class sprinter would run by, and he goes to me, he's like, what do you think? I'm like, I don't know, like, you're the expert. I'm just hanging out here, just trying to like, but, he knew that if I had to kind of put into words what I saw, that it was easier for him to offer feedback to me. And I think that back and forth is so important. And, that's something we talked about, you and I talked about, in terms of having an in-person event is like, now you can ask questions and you guys can, we can work off of each other. And if we're doing a practical demonstration with somebody and something weird happens, then we all have to kind of go, okay, well, how do we solve this problem? This isn't normal. This is atypical. And that's what makes us better. So I think having those type of mentors, and I traveled a lot back, like, this would have been like, again, 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago, when travel was a lot easier. Um, and I wouldn't think twice about, let's jump on a plane, let's go to Toronto, let's go to wherever, LA, and spend time with these people. And I didn't really think about the cost, and um, and you want to be fiscally responsible when you're kind of growing your career, but at the same time, there's certain opportunities you got to jump on.
Mm.
And thank goodness I did.
Mm.
And a lot of the stuff that I learned 20 plus years ago, it still forms the core of what I do right now. I might have some nuances here or there, but certainly it hasn't changed much, right? So it's which was interesting, because I was watching like old clips from like Chariots of Fire, that would have been like 100 years ago they were training, right? And you see all the drills, you're like, yeah, if people did that now, they'd be pretty good, right? Like if most pro athletes followed what they were doing in this movie, they'd probably be okay. So I think stuff like that really interests me about what has stood the test of time and what can we use with different populations now. And like, like I said, Al's 76 and he's doing running A's and wearing a weight vest and all that. And I'm like, okay, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think for some of the people who don't know, and hopefully I'm getting this accurate, but I think Alvar Mills the only strength and conditioning coach to win into the major four sport leagues, right? 6 championships with the Bulls during the Jordan era, and then once with the Niners, right?
Yeah. He was, and he'll say it more than anyone, is that he was very lucky, but at the same time, he took advantage of those opportunities and made the most of them, right? And I think he also he worked in Major League Baseball too. So yeah, somebody like that, great person to lean on.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the reason why I bring that up is just having skin in the game, having, like you said, results that hold against the test of time in different scenarios allows you to take the information that you learning from him, working with him, and say, okay, this is how I think this applies to the general public. And I think what you said about making it worthwhile to see someone in person is important, because you can get all the background information from a book. You can you take your virtual course and bounce, like just look at the concepts. But when you're right there solving the problem, looking at your critical thinking, looking at, I might think go this way, but I might not say it out loud in front of you, but then you might say, oh, go that way. You learn a lot about decision making and expertises. You arrive at this, decision very quickly, and it took years to arrive at that answer. But I think that's the whole advantage of seeing you in person and being able to ask questions right then and there, because that's like the expertise. And I think that's why I love your stuff, is because you make it very digestible and very simple. You don't overcomplicate it. Sure, there's a lot of science that goes into it. There's a lot of thought process and critical thinking, but you make it very like, okay, I would just do this. This should take care of this most of the time, or whatever it is. So yeah, I'm super excited about that. And I love, some of the people you've learned from is just incredible. And I like how you're not, you're continuing to develop, not just, staying stagnant with that, but even if you arrive at the same conclusions, you're still stress testing and working with different people, different groups. And I would love to hear a little more about different things that you've done at the pro level or at the collegiate level, or even with your own kids at the developmental stages, that you think, I think of it as principles, right? It's stuff that applies across the board. Can you talk a little bit about how trainers, physical therapists, or sport coaches would benefit from some of the stuff you'll be teaching?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that you need to communicate to people is there has to be some consistency and persistence around everything you do. So with my own kids and even some of the stuff that I learned from people like Charlie Francis. And something that you may not see at the professional level as much is this consistency of training, and the fact that it has to be quite boring. It has to be quite regimented. And even in physical therapy, I think all of us easily get drawn into doing things that look different and look unique and kind of trendy, and and variety is very important, and I don't disagree with that. But at the same time, the reason that say my son is fast is because we go out to the track 2 to 3 times a week over the last 2 years, and we just kept working on it. And it wasn't exciting, and I found that the only way I could make it interesting for him was to invite other people to attend, and different personalities, and then you had a group mentality around it. And you could say the same for fitness or even rehab, having this sort of group mentality and team mentality while you do very boring stuff, right? So you have to go through and do the drills, and you have to do the accelerations, and you have to make sure you have a good warm up, which is, usually doesn't vary that much. And I think that's the one thing that is shone through for me, is that I have to be as consistent as possible, and I have to accumulate repetitions and skills over an extended period of time. And and I do work in a physical therapy clinic, and that's the one thing that I've learned too, is that working with general population is you're going to make them do stuff that they probably don't do a lot, whether it's certain strength movements or certain like I said, drills. Like we do running drills, and some of these people have not run since maybe they were in elementary school or high school, right? And so you have a 55-year-old guy who's got back pain or knee pain or whatever, and you're teaching him running drills, and it's foreign to him. And then that's all that a lot of sessions, that's what I would work on all the time, was just the same running drills. And then they come back and they go, yeah, I feel stronger, I feel better, my back doesn't hurt. I want to keep doing this. And so, you know, what may seem like a really mundane activity is actually very novel for somebody who hasn't done it since they were a kid, or they may not even have done it as a kid. So I think that's what I'm always doing, is I'm trying to pull from maybe something I did at a higher level or with an extraordinary athlete, and going, okay, well, what was the important stuff there? And usually it was the basic, boring stuff that we just kept working on. And so now I think I have a really good sense of what needs to be done. And then I'll, I'm not a moron, right? I'll try and dress it up with other things that look exciting, but it's kind of a smoke screen. Like, it's like, okay, let's do this fancy drill here with, we'll put a band around your neck and, whatever. And they're like, oh, that's cool. And then we'll get back to the boring stuff. Right. So you have, I mean, again, that's the New York thing, right? You got to dress it up. You gotta appear to be innovative, but at the same time, you get the really good stuff done, which again is pretty routine, more boring.
I think the other thing you said is way more powerful. The group mentality is, I mean, I as a personal trainer used to frown upon like group stuff because, it's like, oh, it can't possibly be better than a personalized thing. But, I think some of what you're getting at is that being able to sprint and being able to run well checks off a lot of boxes that says your musculoskeletal system's healthy, your general health is good, and you're maintaining a lot of qualities that you need in other things. But if you can scale it to a group, or you can get people to do it together, it takes care of needing to dress it up, because I think the physiology of the body doesn't really care for social factors like boredom and things like that. If you want to get better, you have to keep driving that stimulus. And that's something I really want to ask you about, honestly, when we're meeting in person, but we might as well bring it up here, is I want to do, something that you did over the pandemic, which you made these, I don't want to butcher the name, but you had groups of people sprinting together. I know in New York, I know Pat Davidson was doing, what was the name of that program?
Oh, we did like just a summer speed virtual program, and then people would get the program, and they would get like 10 friends and go to the field or the track.
Yeah, that to me is well, we can take what CrossFit did. The good parts of it is create the community, create the camaraderie, work together, and that takes care of it. I want that to be me. My own selfish personal goals is to Because I value what sprinting does to people. I value what being able to run does for both performance athletes and people who are injured. So I want to get more people involved. So I want to ask you about, different ways we can problem solve, things like how do you scale it to different levels? How do I guess this is not really, I guess it's related, but how do what's the model around it? Do you just do like a subscription thing where like, hey, like pay this monthly and every 3 days we're gonna, meet us at the track and we'll
Yeah,
wherever you
I
want.
like that. I like honestly, I would, because I've done this also with physical therapy where we created an open concept where it was just like your facility, you have an open space. Okay, everybody who's got whatever knee coming off an ACL, like we had 3 people and we put them together and they're doing all the drills and because it's like a sprint based approach in open space. I didn't need that much equipment. We probably had a few resistance bands. We didn't need like any fancy weightlifting setup or anything like that. And so we had people show up. I think it would be nice if there could be some sort of special rate, but they were just paying for their individual visits. But we grouped them together and they would ask each other how their day was and, oh yeah, I had to go get this done, and how did you injure yourself? And so it was this really interesting dialogue between people who probably wouldn't have ever encountered each other, but now they have something in common, which was rehabilitation.
Mm,
And so they're doing all of the drills together. They might have similar issues, they might have different issues, but every time they showed up, they were kind of happy to see the group, which was
mm,
interesting because usually you go to physical therapy, somebody shoves you in a room, pulls a curtain over you, or hooks you up to a machine. And I'm generalizing, obviously, but having like a group sort of dynamic around rehabilitation, because that's kind of what happened when I was working with sports and at a university or with even pro teams. During the football practice, all the guys that were injured were with me and
mm,
were on the sideline because they had to be close in case they had to go to their position group and talk about like the defensive strategy or offense, right? And then they'd come back to me and then we'd do some more stuff.
mm,
So there is a little bit of a 3-ring circus mentality around, okay, this guy's Achilles, this guy's adductor, this guy's hamstring, but you just do it. You just manage, right? And you give them similar drills. And that's the great thing is what I present in my course is like, these are your tools. These are the drills that you're going to use. And if it's a calf, then you got to be careful of like deep acceleration. If it's a hamstring, you got to be careful of being too upright. And
mm,
but there's modifications and there's ways you can get around it. But
mm,
everybody got better because of that team group mentality, and they were all pulling for each other, and they didn't think
mm,
about why they were there,
mm.
which was they were injured. So I think there's something there. If there was, even for rehab, like if there was a subscription based rehab approach where like, okay, all the lower back people, let's show up and let's go train. But I don't know how that would work insurance wise, but certainly I think there's something there. So any chance that I get now, when somebody wants one-on-one, they feel like they're getting more, I guess, like when they're paying for one-on-one. But sometimes I encourage them like, hey, let's put 3 of you together. You can pay a bit less, but you'll get the same benefit and just as much as attention as you need. Because you know how it is when you're working one-on-one with somebody, there's dead time. You can only talk about so much before you just get bored to tears. So if you have other people there, it's way more interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So it sounds like, and I don't know if this is a level one thing or a level two thing, but it sounds like based on injured body part, and obviously not all causes of pain are caused by the same thing, but it sounds like you have general modifications you would know for, like you mentioned, the calf or a hamstring or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, so that's something you'd be breaking down in over the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's easy enough. And the great thing is like I use a lot of the running drills to assess. So okay,
Mm,
do a march, and then you start picking things apart and you see relationships between upper body, lower body posture, how they contact the ground. And then it starts giving you information to help you make decisions about where to take them, right?
nice.
And that's the great thing. It's not, and I don't want to necessarily malign screening processes, but I'm doing training which is going to move them forward, but at the same time I'm screening too, and I'm talking to them and getting feedback. How do you feel? I use my phone to video everything because
Mm,
one, I want to establish what the baseline was and I can archive that footage and then 3 weeks later compare against it. But at the same time, I can see things, like I can see posturally how they might be guarding, if they're landing a certain way or if they're landing too loud. That gives you information on how to plan the next session. So I just think, the stuff that we're going to get into is, uh, what surface do I start them on? Do I start them on a harder surface or a softer surface? What
mm,
what knee height in the drills do we use for this injury versus this injury? And I haven't really found any problems. Like, I haven't found a unique injury where like this doesn't work. We've even had people with brain injuries,
mm.
and stroke, um, hand injuries, shoulder. People come off labrum surgery, and we strap their arm to their chest, and we get them to do the running drills until they can start moving their arm. We just find ways to get it done. And there's all these interrelationships between, like, if I get my lower body moving more forcefully or faster, it has this sort of crossover effect upwards, and vice versa. If somebody has a lower body injury, we get them to pump the arms more vigorously, and then it transfers down. So it just organically seems to work.
That's awesome. What you're describing is something that I know that I teach in the courses with Dr. Liebenson, Craig Liebenson, who's my mentor. And one of the things we teach is every exercise is a test, which is exactly what you're describing. And we always use this. We refer to Dan Paff, who's does similar work with track and field. He says his screen is watching people go through the warm up, so it sounds like it matches. And I love when principles ring across the board, because it's just more evidence that something holds true. So I love that you do that, and then you can break down with us. If you see this, then I would suspect this, and then I would try to alter it this way. And that's great. I didn't realize you did so much rehab and PT work. And for me, I was a trainer before a physical therapist, but now that I'm a physical therapist, I probably don't do any hands-on work. I just, I just try to train people smarter and educate people better. And it seems to always be the most two important ingredients. So can you talk a little bit? I didn't realize you were doing so much PT and rehab work. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I
let's
mean,
get into that.
like, again, I have a lot of friends who are PTs, and so there's been a lot of crossover where I'll doing hamstring rehab, and then using that approach for different injuries, and then I'll just say, like, this worked for me, and then they'll try it, and they're like, yeah, that does work, right? And it doesn't matter. And I was a huge advocate of a lot of things related to soft tissue therapy, and I have a lot of friends who do that. And I found at times that I didn't have access to these people.
Mm,
So I had to kind of figure things out on my own and find ways to modify exercise so that people could still do it and move forward,
mm,
and may not have, access to, dry needling or, myofascial release techniques or whatever, so that we had to find progressions that maybe did the same thing.
mm,
Um, you know, and that was learned from being a track coach, where you have 12 athletes out at the track. There's no medical support, and
mm,
so somebody has a, this or that, this is tight, oh, I feel like I strained this. And what do? You don't send them home, you just find ways to get things done
mm,
without hurting them more. So I think that's where that came from. And then now, I help out at a physical therapy clinic locally here, and they'll throw people my way, like kind of the cases that they don't know what to do with. And so I'll get them doing some of the drills and things, and then everybody's looking at me, like I'm a, a space alien. But, people get better, and the patients, the bad thing is that the patient's like, oh, can I work with Derek today? It's like, no, you're supposed to work with me. Um,
yeah,
because we're doing different things. And I think doing sprint drills is very boring for me. Like it's just what I do. But then everybody else looks at it and like, that's physical therapy, like, you know. And so there is a novelty to it. And I'm not saying that's why we're doing it. We're not doing it for the novelty. We're doing it because it just
Works.
gives us another, again, it's another bullet in the chamber to try to throw at somebody and just say, hey, try this. What do you think? Oh yeah, that feels better, right? Whether it was, and I've, again, I think it's great to immerse yourself in different scenarios. So like, oh, this is a 50-year-old who just had a knee replacement. This is a guy who was chasing his kids and bilateral quad tendon rupture. Here,
Mm.
you try him, right? And so, you know, I think that there's some value in being immersed in situations where you're like, I don't know if this is gonna work, but let's try it. And it worked, right? So you know, it's that's just the healthiest thing you can do for your education is being thrown into situations where you're not quite sure, because the stuff that if you keep doing the same stuff over and over again, and you're not tested, you won't really change, right? So I think I like being thrown into weird situations, where, yeah, okay, let's try this, right? Let's see if we can start moving the needle.
Yeah, you're stress testing your methods and your ideas and your principles, and it seems like it holds up really well. And I think your story reminds me of the beginning of my career. The day before my physical therapy board exam, I took a running course, return to play course by a guy named Chris Johnson. I don't know if you know him. He's out in Seattle, but he taught me to use a metronome. Based on the concept of distance runners want to a frequency of something like 170 to 180 steps per minute, and as you increase the metronome beats per minute, you're actually increasing force because you got to hit the ground faster in the same amount of time. Um, and I used to use this metronome for my first job out of school, and everyone thought it was nuts because people were marching with the metronome. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, it's like lifting heavier weights, and people just didn't get it. Like, but it actually helped a lot of people. It's like we need more creative ways to measure stress on the body and implement stress on the body and develop towards where they need to go. Because I think what you're talking about or what you're alluding to is that pain is and injury is contextual, and if people need to get back to running, then why not take the steps and build up towards it, regardless if it's like you said, a quad tear or a knee surgery or something else. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what the injury is. What matters is what they're trying to get back to. So I like the lens of, okay, let me see what you have. Let me see where you need to go. And then I'll just start problem solving it. And that's what I'm excited about you being in person is you're basically going to help. Well, it sounds like you're going to help us be able to be better problem solvers in the context of running. And most people don't realize how much team sports, field sports is all tied back to sprints. People don't realize that soccer goals and basketball, the best accelerators and sprinters are the people who are be able to score goals or beat people on plays. It's not just how long can you run around slow for. It matters how fast you are, and there's a way to develop that specific trait. And so yeah, I love something that came out in our conversations. We were talking about like even ice hockey players. Like you've stress tested this with ice hockey players, and what you see there can still be affected by what you're teaching in the sprint stuff. Can you talk a little bit about I guess how all this applies to different sports, different populations, and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much said it. Everything breaks down to like, hey, there's the ball, there's the puck. I need to get over there. So either you're pursuing the ball or the puck, you're pursuing an opposing player, or you're trying to get into open space, right? And if you're on a basketball court, there's not much distance to cover. I think it's about 30 meters, 30 yards, the length of the court. And most of the big moves will happen over 3 or 4 steps,
Mm.
right? And so repeat acceleration ability is very important. And ice hockey's the same, except that beyond 3 or 4 steps, then you start to glide and push to the side. But those initial steps to get the body moving is critical. And if you don't have that explosiveness and that ability to reproduce those steps at a decent frequency, then you're going to be left out of the play. And the I guess with a lot of sports, it's all based on natural selection. So whether or not, you know, Michael Jordan had a great sprint program, I don't know. Like, they said he was fast and had the fast twitch fiber, but he just kept on rising because he had that ability, and then he matched it with his ability to handle the ball, score, whatever, and just be very aggressive. But he had that natural born speed,
Mm.
right? And but if he didn't have that speed, he wouldn't be where he was, right? So some of that stuff is genetic, like we talked about. Some of it can be worked on and developed. So it's just a matter of, you know, getting some of those players at an early age and developing those qualities. And then, with some of the pro teams that I work with, it's amazing. You'll see somebody who's like, oh, this is so and so. He's like an all-star, and he's going to be in the Hall of Fame. And then you sit down and you work with them on sprinting, and you're like, wow, this guy has never been taught this before. And
Mm.
I would say that's probably that's more the rule than the exception, where you
Mm.
just have these natural ability, talented athletes who just got to where they are because of natural selection. And then you find out, wow, they didn't really learn a lot about it. And when the best place to work on it is? After they get injured, right? That's when, because everything kind of breaks down, they get injured and they're like, what happened? Like, everything was going so well. And
Mm.
then you actually go back and you analyze how they move, and you're like, well, you're a little less efficient than you could have been when you
Mm.
sprint and you accelerate, and it finally just came down on you. Everything crashed down on you because that was never fixed. But as we say in the rehabilitation course, the level 2 courses, every time you get injured, it's an opportunity to get better. And that's kind of the attitude we have. Like, somebody pulls a hamstring. Okay, well, no problem. Let's fix it. Let's look at the way you run. Let's fix it so that it never happens again, or reduces the probability. Somebody tears their ACL. Well, again, let's start working on your mechanics and make sure that this, the potential is reduced, because have now made you a better mover. So I think that's the philosophy that I take now, is that not only do you have a captive audience when somebody gets injured, but now you have time to work on these things when, like you said, usually they're playing games, or they're in training camp, or they're practicing. And now I have time to actually hold your attention and work on this so that you can get better.
Yeah, it's the gift of injury, right? Because you try to tell someone that they need to work on these things, they're not, the bind's not necessarily going to be there unless something comes crashing down. But hopefully if we can get, it sounds like if we have, let's say, general population people who don't necessarily aren't in that situation, but have our trust and want to get better, hopefully if we can implement these things proactively, that should also reduce the risk in a lot of cases too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, if you look at most people in the general population, again, I'll do a survey, like, how many have sprinted maximally? When was the last time you did it? I don't know, grade 7, or, grade 6. I went out for the track team in grade 9, and I stopped after that. So they are missing, like you said, they're missing stressors. They're whether it's a nervous system stressor, or whether it's like peripheral, like in terms of different muscle groups, and things being able to stretch and shorten very quickly. Like, most people aren't prepared for that, right? So if a car veers off and is heading towards you on the sidewalk, well, what are you going to do, right? You and I, hopefully we could sprint and jump away from it, but most people can't, right?
Yeah.
So, and I hate to break it down that way, but it is about survival, and it is about being prepared. It's that preparedness piece. So when somebody gets injured, and you start, like, and you could probably tell me more than I could tell you, is like, you get a general population person who's injured, and you go back and you go through their lifestyle, and you're like, okay, well, you could sleep better, you could eat better. Do you exercise regularly? Not really. Okay, well, you could exercise, or you've probably done something like, oh, I'm going to do a boot camp, right? And then they get injured, and it's like, well, what did you do before that? Well, absolutely nothing. So it does come back to training and preparedness, for all of these people. And they may never want to sprint or run a marathon or whatever, but it is a very easy way to get that stress into their system in a safe manner.
Yeah.
Um, and that's why I think it worked on the rehab side, was because it's a conduit. It's a conduit for stressing and loading somebody,
Mm.
because not everybody likes lifting weights. And it's not about, like you said, it's not about endurance. It's not about going and running 26 miles. It's about acute stressors, that we can impose on them in a safe manner.
Yeah, from the rehab perspective, and we learned this concept from Bob Alejo, who also believes in doing like in-season sprints and short sprints and max effort things. Is in rehab, when someone can't do something, that's a 1 RM. So to your point, if it's a conduit, when they can't express the ability to run that hard or fast or to absorb that much force, then we have to problem solve that. That's the next 1 RM we're trying to solve. And I think that's where the social aspect of the whole running thing is so important, because to your point about your son, is it's so hard to give a max effort sprint by yourself. Like, what's the motivation to like kick into that last gear that's reserved for like a fight or flight, like real like situation? And we've hosted a bunch of courses, some people who work on some things like sprinting, and no one ever gets hurt in the gym until you start doing competitions. And when people try to race each other, like that's the last time even fitness professionals or people really athletic are truly exerting the true max effort that the demands. And I know you're going to talk about this a little bit during the course, but just the forces that are imparted on the body, and the speeds, and the forces, and the loads on the body that occur during sprinting. Talk a little bit about why that's such a good conduit, because people don't realize nothing in the gym is like sprinting, right?
Yeah, you can't reproduce that in the gym. And you could talk about load and force, but the velocity component is not even close. So if you're running it 4 or 5 strides per second and you're off the ground in less than a tenth of a second, there's nothing quite like that. You can't really do that with plyometrics even.
Mm.
So if you have the ability to sprint somebody 20, 30 yards, you can put a pretty significant stressor and load on them. And there's a great study out of Japan. I think the researcher was Nagahara, and they had six. I don't know if it was 60, but they had about 30 force plates, and they just lined them up, and they had guys run 60 meters, and you can see that the vertical force goes up every step, right? So the higher the velocity they reach, the more force they're putting into the ground. So there's something to be said for letting people run to their max velocity and maybe holding them there for a couple of seconds.
Mm.
So if you can do that and it's part of your training, that they're going to be able to handle greater loads. Like on the weekend, my son was playing football and somebody jumped on his back and he's running down the sidelines, and you could see he landed and his knee kind of locked and almost hyperextended very slightly, and it kind of jarred him. But um, I think in any other person who hadn't trained like he did, it could have been an ACL right there, right? But it just sort of, it held, and he was fine. So I think that preparedness piece is so important for ultimate resiliency. And the weight room is good, and you got to do the weight room stuff, but when you're running down the sideline, somebody jumps on your back, that's not like a squat or a clean. That's a lot different, right? And your cleats lock into the turf. So um and I think that's missing. I think that's missing from a lot of people's movement vocabulary, you
Mm.
know. So that's all we're trying to bring. Is we're not trying to make people into world-class sprinters. We're just trying to introduce different levels of stress.
That's awesome. I love that. And do you go over things like what kind of baselines and prerequisites you're looking at before someone's capable of doing some of these drills or true sprints?
Yeah, I think, and that's the great thing about the return to play approach, which is a sprint based approach, was that you start people with the drills, and you may start at lower amplitudes in terms of their knee lift and all that, and then you get in a session, and then you see how they feel the next day. And I like doing consecutive days of training on for rehab cases, because it's kind of this real time adventure where you're like, okay, how do you feel okay, the next day we'll load it some more and more. And you get this sort of synergy and momentum by doing consecutive days,
Oh,
which is harder to do in a, in a private entrepreneurial setting. But with a team, that's what I was doing all the time, was consecutive days. And you can build up so much momentum, that you can return people so much faster. Whereas if you only see them once or twice a week, there's a lot of stuff that happens between those days and you lose momentum. So there's certain cases where I'll say, like, can you at least see me on 3 consecutive days? And then, and then we'll let them go for a bit longer, and then we'll see them back again and do a couple more consecutive days. And it just works better. From it's not as convenient for them, but certainly it works better. And so, those are and it's no different than if I was working with somebody who hadn't ever trained before. I'd probably try to go on these sort of micro dosing approaches of getting them to do a little bit more each day, because I know it just builds momentum, and it launches them a lot quicker, and they get more confident. Because I think if you have time to sit around and think about your injury, it's not good. So if you're constantly working, and you're seeing progress, it's like, oh yeah, this is good, right? So I think there's a psychology behind doing some of this stuff as well, that works really well and gets people on board.
wow, I love that, because that's one of the big things we talk about is building confidence and stacking wins. So I love that you found in your experience that consecutive days is actually more impactful than, because I have this whole thing about how proper fitness and rehab usually isn't delivered because of social constraints, not really because of,
Yes.
like, we're not making decisions based on what's best for people from a health standpoint. Always, a lot of times it's more influenced by costs or practice or whatever it is. So that's super interesting. It's making me try to rethink how I deliver all these things. I
Well, it
love.
makes me think about, like, could you do, like, say they could only come and see you twice a week in person, then there has to be almost like a virtual component that they can follow on those off days, that kind of connect the dots between your visits, right? So I've been thinking about that a lot too, is how could I, it might be an app based thing, but certainly the drills that I introduce on day one, you have them sort of extrapolate from there. And so that by day two, then when they see you the next visit, they've advanced. And they haven't, I'm not going to say detrained, but they haven't habituated away from what you were doing, and then you can launch them again. Like, each of your visits are like little launch platforms, right? So
It's kind of like we were talking about the stimulus. You need to keep stacking the stimulus.
yeah,
Get
yeah.
something. Wow, that's super interesting. I never really thought about that. I guess especially in a rehab setting, we always talk about recoverability from, like, people. I know they cite some of Charlie Francis's work where, like, sprinting is a very high CNS demand thing, but in a return to play situation, you're probably not getting a true sprint, so you can stack multiple days.
Yeah.
And more importantly, to your point, is you need to stack multiple days, not in an ideal situation. That's super interesting. And do you measure speed with everybody? Like, to build that confidence, we always say you can't manage what you don't measure. And I know if someone like you has to measure everything to show results. What do you do for
Yeah.
that?
I mean, like, an example would be in my hamstring return to play process, where it's repeat 10-yard sprints or 10-meter sprints. We do 10 consecutive sprints, and usually takes about 90 seconds, and then we give them a break, then we keep doing it.
Mm,
I will now start putting out timing gates,
mm,
and I won't time the whole 10 yards. I might just do, they get a flying first 5, and then they do 5 to 10 yards, and I just get a time window from that. But all it does is it just tells me, one, are they kind of averaging the same time, so that, one, I don't want them going too slow, but at the same time, I don't want them going too fast either. I want a certain submax time that they can repeat safely. And so I'll use that a lot for the rehab, knowing that they're not going to try to do something sensational and set us back by restraining. So it is
mm,
it is there just for, just to remind me that they're repeating the sprints at what I would call an acceptable rate, but not beyond that, right? Because there's this accumulation you have to achieve with the sprints. before you can advance them to a higher velocity or start lengthening out the distance, right? So that's what I've been doing now, is a lot more timing. And I'm not telling them, I'm not saying, yeah, you hit, 1 second or whatever. I'm just sort of looking at it going, okay, that's about right. That's within a tenth of a second. Keep going. Just stay relaxed, keep going. So I have been quantifying it a lot more. I know one of the team in the course, we talk about a team that I worked with in Germany, and they use GPS. So they would strap the GPS on and make sure they were hitting certain velocities every repetition, every set throughout rehab. And so we have some nice graphs that show how they improved throughout their rehab process.
Wow. So that reminds me of like velocity-based training, where like when the intent is there, if they can't produce the same output, then you know that certain systems are breaking down. So you know
Yeah.
not to push that. And so it sounds like you brought up repeat sprintability. So that's a concept that I think is foreign to a lot of people. But can you talk about the importance of that and what you do with that?
Yeah. I think, if you look at fitness testing for sports, you'll have everything from like the 1.5 mile run, or I think one of them's a Cooper's test, is like a 12-minute run. And now I see that a lot in like military testing or tactical testing. So it's like 1.5 miles. And so you start asking yourself, well, is that relevant? Like, obviously we want to know what somebody's cardiac ability is, aerobic ability, because it's, general fitness indicator, right? But from a practical point of view, is that useful? Is having somebody, like, how many firefighters do you know that have to run 1.5 miles, right? To a fire, right? Usually they pull up in the truck and then they have to go up a few stairs and jump and whatever. So, but you want a general indicator. But what I found is, by doing repeat sprints, it might be 10 yards or 10 meters, you can produce more what I call a practical adaptation, which is, yes, you're going to get this short speed, power, strength, speed component covered, elasticity, but also you're going to get better in general work capacity. So I've heart rate monitored all my short sprints, and you can get up, I can get over 140, 150 beats per minute through sustained repeat 10-meter sprints. But I'm also working at a velocity that's more useful for playing soccer, playing ice hockey, playing basketball, playing football, right? Because all football is 5 seconds of insanity, and then you reset, after 40 seconds, right? So, in some of the pro teams I work with, we've got them to do these short sprints in rapid succession, and it's been better than what they normally have done, which would be like across the field and back, which is too long. Like, most of the plays aren't that long, and most of the players don't cover that distance. So why are we doing this unnecessarily? So I think I've really pushed more teams to doing a high volume of short accelerations. And I even have a friend who just says, I just do 3-step sprints with all of my athletes. And he's a little eccentric, but he's right on some level, right? Like, how many times do you have to sprint farther than 3 strides in most sports, maximally? So, it's kind of like, name that tune. Like, I can do it in 2 steps, like, but, usually I'll work on progressions of 3, 5, or 7 strides. 7 strides is usually 10 meters or 10 yards. So,
Got it. That's incredible. So I love that concept, because what you're saying is you're getting the conditioning benefits, but you're also developing speed, or at least maintaining or developing mechanics. So you're getting 2 birds with 1 stone. So
yes.
it's more efficient. And I know I don't know if you're tight on time, but I wanted to, I know there's an audience of people who are distance runners, and I
Yep.
understand there's value to this for distance runners as well. Can you speak a little bit about that too?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I don't want to malign, people who run long distances or anything like that, but it's not difficult. Like, it's not rocket science that you have to put in some volume when you're doing some, I want to train for a marathon. Okay, well, you're not going to do short sprints all the time. You're going to put in your mileage. I got that.
Right.
But you should be able to supplement a lot of this volume work, a lot of this distance work, long, slow distance work, with intervals, with short sprints to work on elasticity. And we know that you have to be fast to run fast. So if you're, the Kipchoge, the guy who ran 2-hour marathon, well,
Crazy.
guess what? He's running those in 4:30 per mile or something like that, 4:35 per mile. And you and I cannot do that once. He's doing it 26 consecutive times, right?
Crazy.
And which means that he could probably run 100 meters in under 11 seconds. Like
Nuts.
if you break it down, like he is fast, but he
Mhm.
also has good endurance too. So you have to have some degree of elasticity to improve your running economy. So
Mhm.
he's very light. I mean, most of these guys are about 130 pounds, but they're also very elastic as well. They're
Mhm.
not plodding along. So if you do a sprint based approach to kind of support what you're doing with your long distance running, you're going to be more efficient. And I do this calculation in the course where, okay, if your ground contact time is 0.2 of a second, what happens if we knock off like 5/100ths of a second on your ground contact time? And it works out, you save like 15 or 20 minutes on your marathon time just
Crazy.
by shaving your ground contact time, right? So there are some accounting realities. If you can improve your efficiency, you're going to be faster. You're probably going to get less injured because you just have more integrity on ground contact. And you don't have to train like a dog. Like you could actually have some days where you work on quality elements rather than, because I've met people in New York City who are training for the marathon and they use an app that just basically tells them go run far. Like, okay, today you're doing 10 miles. And I'm like, well, where, if it's like fall in New York City, I can't remember when the marathon is. It's somewhere sometime in the fall, right? But um, I walked through New York City. It's difficult to walk through New York City. How could I get 10 miles in? Well, I assume I'm going to go out by the river or something like that, but it's not fun. So there might be times when I can go work in your facility and do, drills and training and work on elasticity and short accelerations,
Mhm.
maybe jump on the manual treadmill. And that day is going to advance me for when the next time I go out and run in the streets, I feel a little more elastic, a little more responsive, and I'm not beating myself down with mileage. So I think there's a lot of takeaways here for long distance people that probably wouldn't necessarily cross their mind
Mhm.
because they're just always chasing that distance.
Mhm. Yeah, I love, and I think when people see you live, there's going to be a lot of questions about how do you debunk those traditional dogmas and stuff because, or explain it in a way because I understand it. Fortunately, I've seen it in action where I did zero manual therapy, zero like endurance work with people who are in pain who can't finish their marathon because of pain, and we just did some of the stuff that you teach, and then that solves the issue. We know, so it's so useful, but then getting people to buy into that is so hard. And, we don't all have as much pull as you do. So hearing about the explanations to get people to buy in is, that's something like, the live value of just being able to ask questions about the asking situations, asking details around, how many times should they do that? If you saw this, if you saw that. So again, having different scenarios. And I know me and you talked about, bringing different types of examples of athletes or people who have different injuries or problems to problem solve. So I want people to know that they'll see you in action, thinking critically and solving problems, so that we can hopefully learn how to do some of that on our own too. And I think one more thing that's really important that I'm sure some people are thinking is, what if I don't have space, right? A lot of us in New York, we don't have space to do some of these drills. So can you talk a little bit about how little you actually need to get some of these qualities developed?
Yeah, I love using a slide that shows like a phone booth,
Mm.
and there's not many around now, but you could do all the drills in a phone booth on the spot, right? And it was actually interesting. Um, my wife and I were just watching some old ESPN like E60 30 for 30s, and there was one on Marion Jones, who I had a chance to work with like 20 years ago,
Wow.
and there was a bit about her being in prison and how she tried to keep in shape. And I think she said she pulled, and I'm sure she got this from Charlie, but she pulled her mattress off her bed and was just doing running on the spot in her prison cell. And then I think, eventually she went back to the WNBA. So you could probably do it in a prison cell. You could probably do it in an office cubicle. You just have to be creative and know what to do. And so if I have a small facility, And yours is a good sized facility, but it's still, a lot of people might think, well, we'll see, I can't do my long distance running training there, but you can. And same with like other people, like I went to Ryan at Hopkins at Soho Strength, and we went over stuff too, and they had a curved treadmill. And so, you could build your practice or build your gym around running, that other people aren't doing. Like, you don't have to necessarily go to Mile High Run Club and just run, your ass off. You could probably work on technique, elasticity, and get, you could provide a lot of good coaching information for people and instruction in a very small space that they're not going to get anywhere else. And then they can go do their long run on their own. Like, you don't have to run with them. I don't want to go run long distances with anybody, but they can go do it, and everything that you did will transfer over. Right, because it's a very solitary thing to go for a run, or they go in a group now, but usually you don't need to provide a lot of instruction when they go do that, so you don't need to be around for that, but certainly you can be around for stuff that's going to help them when they go on their long run.
Yeah, I love that. I'm getting excited just talking about this. I have like a million questions I want to ask you, but I don't want to keep you here too long, and also I don't want to spoil all the great stuff that you're going to go into. But yeah, I know that the New York community is very excited about having you and your expertise, and I know I have a community of both trainers and PTs who want to work together with a lot of this stuff, where I want to have a team of people where if I can, deal with the injury portion of things, because I know a lot of people think that injuries isn't a part of training, that's for the clinician, but it sounds like, I think this is very important, is even though you're not a physical therapist, it's still what you're teaching allows you to solve the same problem. So I'm very comfortable. I love empowering. I mean, I think I learn more about this stuff from strength and conditioning coaches than I do from rehab professionals. I mean, that's a story for another day, but I know this community in New York wants to be able to implement some of these things, and we want to be able to work together. So we're going to have a lot of questions for you. We're going to have, I love that. We're going to keep it very hands-on and practical and problem solving. And yeah, it's just a few weeks away. So hopefully we'll get a nice turnout, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, I think that, I'm looking forward to engaging with you and other professionals, especially like the physical therapists, where I was just talking to somebody who just went through school, and I said, well, what did you get from that? He's like, I don't know. And I learned more from being involved in events like this, right? So that's the opportunity. And the one thing that I always say in my courses is that as a strength and conditioning professional or track coach, what I always found was that anybody involved in the medical side, running was the last thing they wanted you to do. It was like, you can do all these other things, but don't run until such and such a time. And that always bothered me, because I knew there were things that you could do, but there were these artificial deadlines, like nobody can run after an ACL surgery for at least until week 12.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, well, can I do the running drills? No, right? Like, and everybody was very adamant about that, but nobody ever had like any good reason for it aside from it was written somewhere.
Right.
So
yeah, that's actually part of the way I got into your stuff. Was I took on the advice of the resilient PT guys, who I know you worked with a bunch. They said to go to Rob Pinarella's course, who I know was part of your level 2 med. We should get him in here one day if you can, since we're in New York. But we'll talk about
I'll see if he'll come by. I'll see if I'll twist his arm and tell him to come by on the weekend. So
that would be amazing. But some of the stuff he talked about that you brought up, like the sprinting, like you can start doing these acceleration drills way early, like, I don't know, 8 weeks, because you're just pushing, right? So you're just relying on the quads. So you're the quad strength.
Yeah.
That to me is like, that's huge. And what you're referring to is it's about it's not about timelines, it's about landmarks, right? If you've cleared the ability to do this,
yes,
you should be able to do that.
Competency. Yes.
Yeah. So I will, I'm going to ask you a million questions. I know that the people about all the different competencies, so that, we can get people in a more logical way, getting to where they want to go. And some of the other things Rob shared, like the ACL stuff, the non-affected side is usually not as strong in these non-contact ACLs. So that's not even a good measure. And things like RFD takes over a year to return. So like you got to start with some block pulls or something like as soon as you can. So
Yes. Yeah. It is really about lost time. Like, and if you wait and you're waiting for these timelines, like you said, detraining is happening daily, right? And so now you're losing other qualities, and it's like, oh geez, like, and so I get anxious about it when I hear about like old school physical therapy, and like, like, oh well, he said, like, I had a case where a kid pulled his hip flexor really badly, and then they said, okay, no running until 3 weeks or anything, right? And I'm like, oh god, here we go. And then of course we get him back in 10 days, and
that's awesome. Yeah.
but
So
yeah.
we don't want you to have any more anxiety over this. So you're gonna have to come here and teach us so we can get rid of that old way of thinking. But Derek, thank you again so much for jumping on this podcast really quickly, and then also or the Zoom, I should say, and even more importantly for taking the time to come back to New York. So thank you so much, and we're excited here.
Yeah, well, thank you for twisting my arm and getting me back there too. And this will be my first trip in like almost 2 years, so I'm looking forward to it, and I'll try to make it worth everybody's while. And if anybody has any questions about what we're going to cover, they can contact myself or you, and we'll try to make it absolutely clear what we're going to provide.
Awesome, amazing. Okay, thanks, Derek.
Thank you, Ryan.
Take care.
Take care.